I am happy to say I live in Sauble Beach, Ontario. My current job is I'm manager for spiritual care for Grey Bruce Health Services, South Bruce Grey Health Center, Hanover and District Hospital, Chapman House Residential Hospice, and the Palliative Care Outreach Team for Grey and Bruce counties. So you can just say I'm the manager for spiritual care. This is actually quite unique in some ways. I worked in healthcare in Toronto for many years, but this conglomerate or collaborative is underwritten by a group called Grey Bruce Healthcare Chaplaincy Council, and it's basically the community who said, we want spiritual care as part of our healthcare program, and we're willing to fund it. So they support all these little hospitals, all 11 of them, and hospice and palliative care by fundraising, same as PW does. And so I'm here to help coordinate that. I started going to Pearce Williams as soon as I was able. And I think I was 8. I think that was the youngest you could be at the time. And so that would be somewhere in the 60s. And I went every year as a camper. And then I immediately switched over to a counselor and went every year as a counselor. Even until after we were married. I worked one summer doing cleanup before camp started in May after university was finished. And I did first aid that year. It was the time before we had nurses or doctors on staff. And so I was the first aid person. I got to divvy out all the drugs and stuff that the kids brought along and deal with those who got homesick and had a bellyache and that kind of thing. So I don't know. We got married in 78. It was after that. So between 78 and 80 probably was my last summer there. I would say pivotal. Oh, I was so glad you were going to ask me that question. I like to eat apples and bananas. And it's one of the really fun songs that we sing with our grandkids now. Our kids before, but now our grandkids. I always intended to go into medicine. I always wanted to be a physician and to help people. And so I started university with that intention. And my spouse, Joan, and I had met at camp. And as many know the story, we were married at camp. But we were in university together. We were childhood sweethearts, I suppose. And all of a sudden, I just felt like God was calling me to do something different. And but I hadn't shared that with him. So he was working night shifts at a grocery store to help us pay the rent. And he got up one night and he said to me, I don't want to upset you, but I need to tell you something. I said, what? He goes, I think God wants me to be a minister. I'm going, are you crazy? I've been thinking the same thing. So from there on, our paths went together. We went to the chaplain at the university who says, well, what do we do now? And so he gave us the directions and we went through the church process and we both became United Church ministers. So church sent us off to New Brunswick. We had 7 churches to look after there, and eventually we moved back to Ontario. But this interest in healthcare always stayed with me. And when I got the opportunity to take my first clinical pastoral education program in Toronto, I took the opportunity. And it was like, now I understand who I am. I can finally put those 2 pieces back together. So, excuse me, I did my clinical training. I got certified through the Canadian Association for Spiritual Care. And I've been working as a spiritual care practitioner for almost 30 years. So that's how I got to where I am here. My favorite memory is the wagons. And in my era, it was the experienced counselors who had the older kids. And therefore, you got to be in the wagons. So as a young counselor, being in the cabins was new and exciting because you got to be a counselor. But the goal was always to get to the wagons. And that was the best, the absolute best. I would think the other best thing would be sleeping out under the stars and making sure everybody had tarp over top of them so we weren't all drenched in the morning. I think my spirituality was developing and developed while I was at camp. So I have a very creation-based spirituality. And kids come in all sizes, shapes, colors, ideas about what's appropriate to wear, you know, and I think it really taught me that everybody's just a buddy. You know, there's somebody to love and to care for, and that's gone a long way. The best advice I ever got was from a colleague of mine who was about 10 years older. And so our kids were going through stages differently. And I was going through a rough patch with one of our kids at the time. And she said, with kids, you have to know that at some point, no matter what you do, they're going to be mad at you, or they're going to think you're wrong or upset with you. So you might as well do what you think is right. And I've used that not just with my kids, but I've used that in my work situation. I've worked that with family. When you're not sure what to do, just do what you think is right, and it'll take you in the right direction. Well, a lovely novel that I just finished, and I'm not going to remember the author's name, is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. I think the author's name might be Honeyman, but I'm not exactly sure. Another book I just finished a few days ago is called Cancer is Funny, and it's written by a United Methodist pastor from the US about his own cancer journey, and his name's Jason Michelli. And I'll grab my newest book. It's Exploring Hope in Spiritual Care, a Practical Theology Guide for Chaplains. And it's a nice little book talking about hope and different kinds of hope. And when you're journeying with people in a healthcare setting, they're frightened, they're getting bad news, they're not knowing what's coming next, and having the ability to grasp onto hope can be really challenging at times. So the ones that I would be interested in hearing their answers, one would be my spouse, John Smith. I'd be curious to see how his answers might be different than mine. Another one would be longtime friends who grew up in the same community is Phoebe and Lori Collard, who were both there at the same time as we were. And Nancy Davis would be another one. And although I don't think he might do it, I'd be interested to hear my son, because he did work at the camp for a short period of time, a couple summers. I have to say, the last time that we spent any considerable amount of time at the center was for the 40th anniversary. Maya had invited John and I to come and help with the celebration. And I still have that song stuck in my head. Thanks, Maya. And I would just say, you know, it's really important to stay connected. It's really important to feel like you're not forgotten. It's really important for the past, the present, the future to find their own way of staying connected. It's a very sacred land, and very blessed and sacred relationships have been born and developed there. So I would really want that to continue. I will close with a story that I thought of on my way into work this morning. There was a minister at my home church who had a nephew who was coming to church. This was years ago, when the sign out front had Pearce Williams United Church Christian Center on the front. And he burst into tears. He was coming to camp for the first time, and he burst into tears, and they thought, oh my goodness, he's going to be homesick. And they said, what's wrong? I can't go here. I'm Presbyterian. They fixed that.